The inability of some critics to connect the dots doesn't make pointillism pointless. George Seurat.
But if the U.S. dollar, if the U.S. deploys a central bank digital currency, it could fundamentally really threaten the hegemony of the dollar as a reserve currency because of this. When you mentioned that the U.S. Just added $6 trillion of new money supply, right? And depending on what time period, that's more than 25 years of new money supply growth, right? In 6 months. When they did that, they devalued the currency for every American citizen. But not only that, they devalued it since 60% of global reserves are in US dollars. When the US did that, we devalued 60% of the global reserves.
The world views dollars as a safe haven. This pandemic caused the Fed to print and print. The dollars other nations were using as a savings lost value. If foreign nations dumped their USA-denominated debt, there would be a very big problem.
Created by private enterprise, but it'll definitely be the central bank will be involved in the certification. And in the US, Jerome Powell made it very clear that the core infrastructure is being worked on, is going to be worked on by the central bank. And in fact, they have just recently announced plans to do so with MIT, with various other institutions.
MIT and the Fed are working together for a fair, open platform that the world can transact on.
I cannot say that there will be a digital dollar GP-CBDC in 3 years, but what I do hope to have with a lot of Neha's help.
Neha is from MIT. The guy speaking is from the Federal Reserve of Boston.
Is an open source platform that we're going to offer the world to take a look at what might work, so that not just the US can benefit it, but from any country or any software developer wants to explore how this might work better.
An open platform that the world can transact on. You cannot send a digital asset through Fedwire or ACH. The technology needed to be updated.
States economy and for the world's reserve currency, which is the dollar, then we need to be there and we need to understand it first and best. So we're working hard on it. There's a group of major central banks that have gotten together to share understanding of the technology and the cyber implications, cybersecurity implications, the economic implications, the financial inclusion implications. It is a big, complex problem, and it's one that we take very seriously. And again, I think it's our obligation to understand it well and not wake up one day and realize that the dollar is no longer, world reserve currency because we just missed a technological. So we're not going to let that happen.
The ball is going to be in their court. The infrastructure, the protocols are going to work off of the base layer that the Fed and the MIT developed. It's going to be open and fair, but they're the ones that are going to build it.
Because right now 100% of interregional settlement happens in hard currencies. 85% of it's USD, the rest is made up of renminbi and pounds. However, our trade agreement called CARICOM, or the revised Treaty of Shragramas, has a multilateral clearing facility in there. What happens when each of these central banks turn to each other and say, hey, let's do direct currency swaps or a multilateral clearing facility that does not use any hard currencies and uses our own national currencies?
And this is why the Fed is going to hurry up and finish the platform.
To settle amongst our notional value of trade or based on a basket. And then what happens when those autonomous layers are started to be used for other types of global assets? Maybe it's a basket like Libra. At the end of the day, these regions and many regions around the world are going to start turning away from settling using hard currencies and using other types of economic agreements that are fundamentally driven by code.
He's saying that the world doesn't need a reserve currency. The central bank's trade can happen without currencies. The reserve status of the dollar happened because it was necessary, but it was never fair for the rest of the world. We are now in an age of technology where we can have fair trade.
Yeah, and I'll agree there that with Neha, certainly, I can't speak on behalf of the Federal Reserve System, and our team is a technology team, right? But what's critical for us to understand, and one reason we've launched this is we know that the private sector, like Circle, like the Center Consortium, for example, are building really interesting technologies that we need to understand deeply. And so regardless if they go to a certain asset threshold that becomes systemically important, and you saw a little bit of that with China, right? The public statements by the People's Bank of China, one of the leading reasons to use the DCEP program was because of systemic risk of Alipay and WeChat, right? They thought that there was systemic risk in those two companies.
Yep.
And so the Chinese government really had to learn how Alipay and WeChat worked, right? To help build their own system. One thing our team does is we're building our own internal testing environment to put technology like Center's USDC technology or the Libra technology through a comprehensive testing environment to understand what kind of at least technology stresses that would put on themselves internally if they got to a scale of $1. Because we think that you have to understand the underlying technology if that does happen and what kind of systemic risk that would pose, at least from a technology standpoint.
So they're testing all of these technologies and seeing if they can break them for when they're used.
Easy for the central bank to take on, and not every central bank, unfortunately, has the resources of the Federal Reserve to take on internal development. And because they don't have that kind of,
Exactly.
those types of
Thank
funding, they have to turn. So 2/3 of the world's central banks cannot afford to do this. And
Yes.
therefore they need to turn to PPPs, private public participations. They need to turn to the R3s, the Cardanos, the Tezos, the Bit.coms, the companies that have positioned themselves to be the experts in the technology, in the issuance, the monitoring, the suspicious activity reporting systems, the mobile wallets, the merchant solution. I mean, it's 15 products that make up the CBDC.
The Cardanos, the Tezoses, the Stellars are working with the poor nations and central banks to develop systems for them. What will bridge all of these digital assets? The Internet of Value has been built around us. The news that we read. Each news article that we read is a dot on a George Seurat painting.
I think that's a very fair question. And the governor made a comment that in parallel to the work that needs to happen to establish the correct and prudent regimes for stablecoins and or central bank digital coins, that there needs to be ongoing work investing in existing payment systems and infrastructure. And in fact, if you look around the world, in many jurisdictions, that work is both ongoing and has produced significant improvements.
Blythe Masters was responsible for the credit default swap, essentially taking bad debt and repackaging it, dumping it to the next person. Now she slithered into the digital assets and has a new plan for the next crisis.
And it's something that both our organization, BIT, and any of our clients that we take on in the central banking world take extremely seriously. We spent the last 4 or 5 years developing software and technology to sit on top of any blockchain. The reality is that Bit.com is agnostic to any one blockchain or the other. We've built on top of Bitcoin as early as 2014 and 15, and then Litecoin and Ethereum and Hyperledger, and we're in discussions with the likes of Tezos to Stellar to Cardano. And to us, it really doesn't matter. It's not our choice. It's the central bank's choice. Do they want a permission? Do they want a permissionless system? Is it wholesale, retail? Is scalability a concern?
All nations are working locally, getting their own houses in order for the day they can go public on the Fed's platform. BIT is involved with central banks all around the world, and you heard them. There are a variety of digital assets that are going to be used.
Although in many cases they tend to be primarily oriented towards domestic applications. And so I think there's a reason why the cross-border use case is often emphasized by those advocating the case for digital currencies and or stable coins is that it's emphasized is that those cross-border instances are where the real inefficiencies and the high execution costs tend to arise.
So Blythe is saying that the cross-border use case makes the most sense for cryptocurrencies.
because now these currencies are programmable, and you're going to see a rise. You're going to see a massive rise of direct currency swaps happening through these systems. Benchmark weighted index currencies, trade weighted index currencies, and you're going to see a new federation of federations of central banks coming out to create their own settlement networks. And that's where this is really going.
The fiat monetary system is dying and reserve currencies are no longer needed. Is this going to be overnight? No, but understand that the end game is the Internet of Value. XRP's market cap is $20 billion. Wholesale markets dwarf nations' GDP. We only need a little utility on the macro scale and everything changes.
That there are forces in play, in part, I would say, as a beneficial side effect of the fact that stable coins and cryptocurrencies have received so much attention. There is increased focus on improving existing payment rails, both from central authorities and private actors. And I think that competition is healthy, and that pressure is very important to continue.
The pressure is on. Nations need to update their legacy systems so they can all transact in the Internet of Value.
I really wonder about this because I think that, today we live in this world where there are hundreds of different national currencies with various, levels of utility and usefulness because they're, confined to certain geographies and nations. What does it do to the role of those different kinds of currencies? I mean, are we realistically talking about a world where there are 200 central bank digital currencies where every IMF country has its own CBDC, or are we talking about a world where a handful become sort of the global standard? And the US dollar, we already know, is the global reserve currency for trade finance and for financial services. But could it also be used as a de facto global reserve currency for e-money and for retail transactions as well? I don't have an answer for this, but it's something I think about, as what does the next stage of humanity sort of look like as it relates to money? And this is more an open question for the group.
That's a good question. What do you think is going to be the future? Are the nations participating in the SDR going to have a CBDC that's pulled together in one token? Will every nation have a CBDC? What is certain is the future is bright for digital assets with utility.
Yeah, I mean, I can say the two-tier models, it's what we do now, right? The Federal Reserve does not handle individuals. That would be a major mission change for us to start managing individuals' accounts or individuals' wallets. And the private sector does a good job of that. So there is a neat fit there. And America has a long tradition of, the public sector with its mission-driven approach, working with the private sector to innovate well. I mean, putting a man on the moon, the internet, right? The whole growth of the internet, that was a public and private sector partnership. It continues to this day. So there's a really nice fit there, Jeremy. I think you're exactly right. Because opening accounts, that's something we don't do for individuals right now. And that would be a big change. And the private sector does it pretty well. And firms like Circle, when we were at Circle and learning about how to really reduce that friction to get more people in the financial system, I think that's something the private sector has done really well. And we certainly need to learn from.
The Fed wants to set up the base infrastructure so they control the game. Everyone else is going to build off the top of this open platform.
I think we're on a major outbreak of paradigm shift. The famous book, I guess, written by Alex's father almost 30 years ago. But this time the paradigm shift is the one that is impacting the way we do trade internally within the country through e-commerce, but also external between countries. Of course, we live in a much more polarized world than we used to live a few years ago. So the CBDCs are actually going to play an important role way forward. I think, and I would like to hear from the audience, how do you see creating an ecosystem that enables these CBDCs to interoperate and cooperate together along with the existing stakeholders of the traditional financial system.
XRP and the software Ripple built is to bridge walled gardens. The Internet of Value is going to have many walled gardens that need to be bridged.
I think one thing, if there is one message that you can get in this room, is Ripple is not an ordinary company. We are not here to have a small market share or do X, do Y, and make small amount of money or something to happen. We are here to make a dent in the universe. Either we will change the remittance universe, the way you understand, the way value gets transferred across the world, between people, between institutions, or we will just fade away. So it's almost 0 or 1, and some of it comes from our Silicon Valley arrogance. Some of it comes from, that's the reason 6 years ago, we were born with the mission of moving money like information moves today, right? And we are making it possible working with the existing ecosystem. So I think this is a key differentiator about Ripple, and that's the reason we are a monoline company. Every day we get tens of ideas to say, why don't you do security settlement? Why don't you work in trade finance? Why don't you do X, Y, Z? And what we tell them is, just cross-border remittances is $155 trillion problem. We'll solve this first. We'll make a difference to everybody who's present in this room. And once we have made the difference, then only we will look at something else. So we are like, Google is for search, Ripple is for remittances. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to do it right, and we will not rest.
Painting is the art of hollowing a surface. George Sierra. I spend a lot of time and energy on these videos. If you're enjoying them, please consider joining my Patreon. The videos are posted earlier for members. Thank you for liking and subscribing.